everybody knows that if we're going to start changing these policies, that we really need to start coordinating our campaigns from the local level to the regional to the national level. And it's one thing to kind of just say that and say we're doing movement building, and it's another thing to really get together, do the planning and the coordinating so that these things really start working together. So, this session is set up that, one of our goals, one of our founding goals was to bring together member organizations as a regional power. And now we're just going to talk about some of the work that we've done over the last couple of months since the Berkeley retreat. At the Berkeley retreat, we identified 3 national groups that we wanted to work with. We wanted to work with the NESRI folks, we wanted to work with the National Alliance of HUD Tenants, and we wanted to work with USACAI.
NESRI is a national organization that coordinates the campaign to restore national housing rights. And there's a bunch of campaign members in the room that will be participating and adding to this. So let me give an overview. The reason we wanted to connect RAP to the campaign was because the goals and the focus were very similar. The style of work was very similar around just engaging base building groups and really trying to shift the dynamic, shift the framework, move towards a human right to housing frame. But also because we, in the national campaign, had already identified housing and criminalization as being interrelated issues, and a lot of times housing groups don't want to take on criminalization and civil rights issues, actually most times in our experience. And so to find groups that were doing both of those things together and understood how criminalization was directly impacting the human right to housing. And so that's how we identified the campaign as a place where RAP should connect. And also the campaign has work group calls. We've been working primarily on housing issues with the campaign, so it's a little bit of overlap in this session around civil rights, but again, I think that we need to be looking at those as interrelated issues. Yes, we have to work on them separately sometimes, but in this discussion I think that they should overlap. So we've been working together around preserving public housing and really identifying public housing as the backbone of the human right to housing and the government's responsibility. We've engaged quite a bit in DC with the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and so RAP and the campaign had joint delegations to DC to begin to lay out our platform and to identify some potential allies in that world, which will be a long struggle, but one that we need to build the groundwork for. As well as just really exchanging ideas and figuring out what we can do in our local areas, like we've been saying, to really escalate, to really push these issues locally and learn from each other, so that when we then go speak nationally, we're speaking from a broad base of folks, a broad base of cities who are engaging in this work on the ground every single day.
As you heard, I'm from New York City. I work with the campaign to restore national housing rights. I've also been on calls and on some of those delegations to DC with RAP, and particularly Paul Bowden, and Mike has participated in some of the phone calls that we've been on a national level. USACAI, the USA-Canada Alliance of Inhabitants, is a group that was born out of the U.S. Social Forum in Detroit. We had conversations with the International Alliance of Inhabitants and Cesare Olatani, their executive director, wanted to see more of a group forming in the United States. So with everybody around the country believing that policies that are created here in the United States are shipped abroad, but if you don't have people fighting the same fight where the policies are originating, then there's somewhat of a disconnect. So there was a thought that while this international group existed, that there should be a national group in the United States. So there was born under the Social Forum, the USA-Canada Alliance of Inhabitants. It goes by the acronym of USACAI, U-S-A-C-A-I. That is members of grassroots organizations, allies from the educational field, allies from the religious field, just working together to work on a zero eviction platform. That's what the International Alliance of Inhabitants believes that everybody should have a home, everybody has the human right to housing. We participate in these calls on a bi-monthly basis. Right now, what we're working on, what the group decided to work on nationally, is a national campaign about criminalization of the homeless. We've seen this happen in LA. You know, particularly there's a connection with a group that I worked with in New York called Picture the Homeless, and a group here, LA Can, that were doing work around this issue already, and RAP was doing it. Folks here in San Francisco were doing it. We see the same things happening around the country. So for instance, in New York, we had a police commissioner, William Bratton, who was working under Giuliani. All of a sudden, he ended up as the police commissioner in LA. So we see these policies exported from one city to another, and we needed to build power to fight back against this. And we figured one way was to create a national campaign around criminalization. We're using a model of outreach that RAP has used in the past to talk to people on the streets, ask them what they're experiencing, and how this plays out, and we're gathering this information with the hopes that if we see that there are consistent policies happening across the country, that we can build this national campaign. So we're in the process now of collecting this data. Myself, I'm not attached to a grassroots organization in New York, but I am associated with a number of organizations. So what I did was ask these groups like Picture the Homeless, like what was called the New York City AIDS Housing Network in New York, who a lot of folks are experiencing this type of punishment from the police. But they've been working on this type of stuff in the past, so engaging these groups, even though they haven't been a part of USACI from day one, maybe we can bring them into the fold because they're already doing this work. So we've created right now actually a campaign around criminalization. We are gathering information in cities across the country. Hopefully we'll come back, and Paul and some other folks and Mike here at RAP will gather that data, compile it, and then give us a turnout, a spreadsheet of what we're seeing across the country. Hopefully we'll build the campaign off of that and move forward. But those are the ways that we bring folks together around the country. For me, this is very exciting because the International Alliance of Inhabitants is a powerful group, right? So if we connect not only our national movement, but start to connect internationally with folks, you'd be surprised at the power you can build. And I'm just going to give you a quick little story to show you how that can play out. So as a member of Take Back the Land, or somebody who co-founded the Take Back the Land movement, we had a specific instance in Rochester, New York, where a family of 11 was being evicted from a house. Cesare Olatani, that executive director of the International Alliance of Inhabitants, got wind of what was happening and had his members from around the world called the two New York senators, Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, and asked why Catherine Lennon is being evicted from her home. That's true.
Yep.
Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, the two New York senators. That makes the situation pretty powerful, right? You call a senator and you say, somebody in your state is being evicted and you don't even know about it? So it ended up with us getting, political involvement, getting the senators involved in Catherine Lennon's case. And it just shows you how you build power with your connections and you make relationships around the world. So hopefully we'll come out with a strong campaign around criminalization, but we need folks to engage in this. So folks, we need folks on the phone, we need folks who are being affected by these issues, folks living on the street, folks who have lived on the street in the past. Your voice is a powerful voice, so we need you to get involved. So when the RAP folks reach out to you folks, we really need you to be on these calls. And I'm sure that the different groups involved in RAP can find a way for you to come into the offices or find a way for you to plug into these phone calls. It's very important that your voices be heard. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Testing.
Go DJ. My name is J.R. Fleming. I'm with the Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign. I'm also part of the Take Back the Land movement and a campaign to restore national housing rights. It is very important, or it has been very important for us as a grassroots organization to make the connection from local to national. The reason why these connections are necessary is because most of the things that is happening in all of our cities are decisions that's made in D.C. By Congress and the Senate, right? So for us to approach this on an individual level, means just, it doesn't serve us well or the people that we're trying to assist, right? As a collective, when you show power in numbers, you're often more influential. That is why we have a relationship, we formed a relationship with the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Progressive Caucus. A couple of examples of how successful we have been in using the national relationships that we have has been policies, right? Policies that often don't favor poor folks. One of these policies started off as, what should we call it? Transforming rental assistance, right? So we hit them with a left hook. We organized collectively, you know, the campaign to restore national housing right with some other groups. We fought off. Then they came up with another program. It was called PETRA, Preservation, Enhancement, and Transforming Rental Assistance. This time, like Becky said, we know we have a relationship with different folks. We challenged the Congressional Black Caucus at their conference that this was a bad program, right? So we saw the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Secretary of HUD, Sean Donovan, and the head of the now Congressional Progressive Caucus, Representative Ellison out of Minnesota. And they were going around this conference promoting this program. But when they saw us, it was pretty hard to deal with, because it wasn't just Chicago in the room complaining. You had New York in the room complaining. You had New Orleans in the room complaining. You had multiple cities represented. And so they knew that they would have a problem, because if Chicago is going to their congressmen and senators, New York is going to their congressmen and senators, LA is going to their congressmen and senators, and New Orleans is doing this, that's organized power, right? And it's just not local, but it's national. But it can have a local impact, right? So we always figured that in order to help ourselves, we have to help others like us going through what we're going through. You know, as a member of the anti-eviction campaign, formerly of the Coalition to Protect Public Housing, another example of how we built power was right after Katrina, right? A bunch of public housing residents got together and said, let's go down there and support residents in public housing from New Orleans. From that, birthed a whole nother national movement around housing again, right? We was able to collectively put our minds together and say, let New Orleans be our ground zero, you know, and let folks from now on fight together as a collective than as an individual. And from that, we have maintained relationships, like Rob said, over 4 or 5 years, known backing them for a while. So this is how we build power. And the fight is not just local, it's national, it's really international, right? This is why we went to the United Nations. Can you imagine the force we had and the show of power we had when all our voices was echoed? The same thing we're saying in Chicago, they're saying in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, rural America. They're saying the same thing in New Orleans. They're saying the same thing in New York. They're saying the same thing in LA. So through national building, you can not only build collective power, but collective messaging, right? When the messaging become universal, and that's another strength in networking nationally, from locally to nationally.
Thank you.
You ready? Good morning. Good morning. My name is Sam Jackson. I'm one of the campaign members that have been fighting for housing and human rights as well. So in New Orleans and other parts of the country, I hear some of the things that have been said, that what we got out of the campaign and the work that we had got out of the folks national in New Orleans to be able to hear the people cry in New Orleans. So we met up together and organized with the public housing residents and the homeless residents in New Orleans. So with the help of the national campaign, well, so there's other campaign leaders that come from the forced eviction, housing, adequate housing, special repertoire on adequate housing, have played a major role in the city of New Orleans as well. So it was ground zero. So we had learned a lot from organizing. When we first put it together in New Orleans, right after Katrina, when the folks weren't able to come back home, we had to organize a way for the folks to come back home. So Media was very young when we built Media. We we actually didn't know too much about the community. When we visited Indonesia after the tsunami, we also learned a lot of information that we needed to come back to organize in New Orleans, which what happened with the tsunami. When the folks over in the tsunami had a tsunami, folks got away, but they had a better chance because those folks went into the hills, and our folks had got dispersed all over the city. And we took that struggle and put it together here in order to come up with a documentary to try to based on how their struggle was and how our struggle was in the United States, which is a documentary we got. Some of you guys know that we had a documentary of Coming Home. You know, we also have a new documentary out as well, so it's More Than a Roof. And this all was presented the work that we have been doing local and national. You know, it's not just a one city thing, because we all have problems all over the cities of the state. So out of those two documentaries, you have a whole lot of good information that folks can able to learn from it and organize from it. It sure helped New Orleans very well. And I can stand up there to say that New Orleans had got power with the people from International. But we was weak, to be honest. We were very, very weak. Because nobody in New Orleans knew how to organize after a devastating event like Katrina. I mean, we used to have hurricanes, but folks would just pay it off. But this time, you really have nobody to know how to organize. So what we did, we made the first press conference right after Katrina, after traveling from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, trying to get the folks together to do, to organize for those folks that want to come back home, especially our elderly folks. So, not to talk too much, but we had learned a lot out of collaboration with other organizations. We was able to put education into this to the residents that didn't know what was happening. We needed that information to reach out to residents in order to make a strong support of residents of New Orleans. So, believe me, we stick together, trust me, we'll win this battle. But if we just depending on somebody else trying to do it for us, it's not going to get done. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.